officially given a membership and also appointed, I suppose, to build the organization Kerala. I hope I'll be able to satisfy you with what I'm going to speak now. So, comrades, the topic that I've been asked to speak about, Naxalbari, the path of Naxalbari, and it's it's been put in English, experiments and results, outcome. I suppose experiments can be understood as its practice. So it would be proper to start with what Naxalbari was actually about. What was the distinctive feature of Naxalbari? I think it would be appropriate to point it out as the conscious application of Marxism-Leninism, Maoism in India, with a clear understanding that the crux of any revolution, the central point of any revolution, is that of the seizure of political power. It is with this very conscious understanding that the Naxalbari armed peasant rebellion was initiated. And we know that when that rebellion took place, at that time in 1967, West Bengal was ruled by a coalition government in which the CPM, CPI, RSP, SUCI, etc., all of them were there, headed by the Bangla Congress. So when this revolt took place, this ministry sent Hare Krishna Konar, who was the revenue minister and also the leader of the Kisan Sabha, to Naxalbari to negotiate with the revolutionary peasantry. And the promise he put forward was that our government will give you pattas to all the land that you have seized, but please put down your arms. That is the only thing that we demand of you. And it is reported that the peasantry replied, we don't need your pattas, we will seize power and then we will decide what to do with the land. So that clarity, of course not all the peasantry, but the conscious elements among the peasantry, that clarity came from the ideological struggle that was waged within the CPM by Comrade Charu Majumdar and a host of numerous comrades all over the country. As a result, from the very beginning itself, the focus was on seizure of political power. Everything else was related to that task. And we know that in the course of the struggle, with a lot of ups and downs, setbacks, mistakes, etc., and all that, finally, that was realized in our country in the form of the Janatana Sarkar in Dandakaranya and the Krantikari Kisan Samitis in Bihar, Jharkhand area, which I believe later, after the formation of the CPI Maoist, was renamed as Revolutionary Committee, something like that. So this was the first time that in our country, through a very conscious effort, the people were able to seize power locally and establish their political power. It happened earlier also in Telangana and in the Sholapur commune also for a brief period. In Ahmedabad also for a very brief period. But that was not the result of a conscious attempt. It came in the course of the struggle. Of course, that has to be valued. It's not that it is of low value because of that. But we have to make a clear distinction there. The Janatana Sarkar and this revolutionary committee and all that, they came through a conscious effort with a very clear understanding that that is the central issue of revolution, which came from a proper grasp of Marxism-Leninism, Maoism. It is very important to stress this thing, that it came through revolutionary practice, because now you see revisionists like this Red Star people, some leaders of them have put up something in the Facebook where they, of course, attack, they say that the reason for the present setbacks suffered by the CPI Maoist is because of its militarism and left opportunism, etc., etc. And interestingly, there is a line in that thing written by one of its leaders that from the very beginning, we should integrate, in the pre-revolutionary period itself, from the very beginning, we should integrate the task of establishing local people's power when we take up activities. Now, how exactly are you going to do this integration? If you are really talking about political power, if you are talking about building local political power, there is also already a power existing here, and do you think that is going to allow you to build your own power there? That directly brings up the question of armed struggle. Now remember, these people are attacking the militarism of the CPI Maoist. They put forward a card in the Instagram or Facebook or something with a broken rifle to show how militarism has been defeated. And these are the very people who are talking about how we should integrate this building of local political power from the very beginning and all. So, I mean, Jantana Sarkar and all these things did not come from wishful thinking. It came from hard struggle, through a lot of blood of martyrs, through the suffering of the masses, through repeated struggles, setbacks and all that. And ultimately they succeeded, at least in some parts of the country, in establishing the rule of the people, in establishing their own government, in establishing their own constitution, rules, laws and regulations, and implementing it for a few decades at least. Of course, now they are facing a setback. Most probably they might even lose all that they have built up. But then that's how revolution goes on. If you look back at the Chinese revolution, we can say that several times they have lost huge areas which were liberated and had their own government. For example, Yan'an and all that. So that is not the issue, whether you lose it or not. It happens in a protracted people's war, that happens. But the fact that they could do that they could establish local people's power, not through wishful thinking or anything of that sort, but through hard practice, shows us that that is something that came out of the Naxalbari path. And that is a very important thing that we have to register today when we have the likes of Sonu and Rupesh and all that attacking this and saying that it was wrong on our part to boycott elections, it was wrong on our part to do this and that and all that. So that is one aspect. I am not going into the details of this Jantana Sarkar because it is probably known to you. I believe there is a very good book on that written by Comrade Pani in Telugu. Several books have come out in English also, which gives some idea about it. So I am not going into the details of that. But related to this Jantana Sarkar, in the context of the setbacks that are being faced by the movement today, there are certain things that we have to think over. I would like to start off from a brief mention in what is now being publicized by the enemy through their media, newspapers, claiming to be extracted from a circular of the party's Politburo, where it mentions about the change in the class character of those in the Jantana Sarkar. I have not seen any detailed explanation of that. And of course, one cannot say that it is an authentic thing also, but still, that does have an importance. What exactly does that indicate? I think we should try to examine that question in the light of the lessons of the Cultural Revolution. You know that the Cultural Revolution started in the mid-60s and there was a big struggle waged against the capitalist roaders led by Liu Shaoqi and Deng Xiaoping and all that. And then later against Lin Piao also. And if you look at the course of the Cultural Revolution, you can see that in the initial period, there were a lot of articles attacking Liu Shaoqi and Deng Xiaoping, basically saying that from the very beginning these fellows were bad. Some of them were collaborating with the Japanese or with the Kuomintang, etc. and all that. But in the later period, particularly after the struggle against Lin Piaoism started, you had very deep analytical, ideological articles trying to understand the ideological, the logic or the undercurrents of this transition. Like for example, they were posing the question of why is it that people like Deng Xiaoping and all that, who were important leaders of the revolution while it was being waged against the Kuomintang government. Deng Xiaoping was an important general of the Red Army, and so was Peng Te Huai and all that, and they had played a very important role in that revolution at that time. So why is it that these people who were at one time great revolutionaries then later became capitalist rulers? Why this transition? Why this transformation? And they went deeper into this question, and I would like to read out a portion from an article which tries to explain this question. It goes like this. When they, those people like Liu Shaoqi and Deng Xiaoping, when they accepted to varying degrees the party's minimum program, that is the program of the new democratic revolution, they did not associate it with the party's maximum program, that is the winning of socialism and communism. In other words, their world outlook is not a proletarian communist world outlook, but a bourgeois one. Furthermore, this bourgeois stand and world outlook have not been remolded in the course of the protracted revolutionary struggles. When the revolution advanced from the stage of the new democratic revolution to that of socialist revolution, their ideology failed to keep pace with the revolutionary advance to that of socialist revolution. On the contrary, although they had physically entered socialist society, ideologically they were still in the stage of the democratic revolution. This determined their inevitable conflict with and even opposition to the socialist revolution. That's from an article titled From Bourgeois Democrats to Capitalist Rulers. I have given the references and all that in my article, which is, by the way, is there in the present issue of Anurtara, January issue of Anurtara. It's also there on my website. So this point that the revolution is advancing, but these people who are leaders of the revolution, their ideology has not advanced accordingly. Ideologically, they are still in a backward stage, and particularly because it is a democratic revolution. So those who are against feudalism, those who are against imperialism, who have patriotic feelings, etc., they too can be part of the revolution without actually adopting a proletarian class viewpoint. They can be revolutionaries, they might even willing to sacrifice their lives and all that. But with that old outlook, it is a bourgeois outlook, it is not a proletarian outlook. And that bourgeois outlook during the new democratic stage is progressive. So therefore they can be part of the revolutionary movement. But if they do not remold their thinking, then naturally when the revolution advances to the socialist stage, they will fail to keep up with this and they will start drifting apart and they will start opposing that. They will transform into capitalist rulers. So this offered a deeper understanding of why this is happening. It is not just to say that this fellow is an agent from the very beginning, or that fellow is an agent and that is why he is doing all these things. They might become agents at a later stage after collaborating with the enemy and all that, but actually the transformation comes because of the ideological transformation does not take place, remolding does not take place. Now, when we see that in our context, as I said earlier, the key point of Naxalbari was the seizure of political power. But political power for what? What exactly is this political power for? Is it just to settle some issues around the place where the people live? Or is it just to end the question of imperialism and feudalism in our country? Or is it related to a more wider, worldwide understanding of the world proletarian socialist revolution, of the transformation of the whole world, of the emancipation of humanity, which is the crux of the proletarian emancipation? So political power you can understand at various levels. The seizure of political power can very well be understood as, okay, there is this Jamindar, there is that fellow, we have to finish them off, seize the land, and then we will have our rule. That can be one understanding. You can understand it at the level of the country, that we will get rid of imperialism and feudalism and comprador bourgeoisie, and then we will build a very powerful India. That would be another level. But neither of these levels would be a communist understanding of the issue of seizure of political power, a proletarian understanding of the question of seizure of political power. Because that requires you to understand that seizure of political power at the level of a world revolution, of a communist revolution, of the emancipation of whole society, of advancing to a stage where we are able to transcend state power itself and have a classless society where the state becomes unnecessary and withers away. That would be the proletarian understanding. So in that context, when we examine our own experience of this Jantana Sarkar and Kisan committees and all that, revolutionary committees, and this particular reference that there has been a change in the class character of those who are there in these structures. What exactly is that change in class nature that could have taken place? One does not have the details, so one can only speculate in a certain sense. Obviously, it cannot be one of having private property and lording over the other people. That would not have been possible in these areas where there is a party is present, where the PLG is present, militia is present. It would not be possible for anybody to seize the collective property of the Janata Sarkar, controlled by the Janata Sarkar, and declare that it is my property. That would not have been the case. So then what is this change in class character? Let us look at the slogan of Jal Jangal Zameen, which would have definitely played a role in some form or the other in mobilizing the masses in the struggle for the seizure of political power. Because that is something that is addressing their immediate necessities. But if that Jangal Zameen is understood in isolation, as I said earlier, if the question of political power is understood as from that perspective of that local area alone, then what would that slogan imply? I have noted that in my article like this. Let us consider its implications when political power can be exercised locally in a relatively stable manner. The call to take control of Jal Jangal Zameen would have played a crucial role in the struggle to achieve that power. But if that was grasped in isolation, in an absolute manner, separated from the tasks of making revolution in the whole country, from the world socialist revolution, from the communist task of emancipating the whole of humanity, then that slogan would play a negative role. That very slogan which helped or mobilized the masses would turn into its opposite. Because then you will not see the necessity of pushing ahead forward. You would have a conservative attitude to the struggle. You would think of how to protect what is there and if necessary make compromises for that. So this change of class character would definitely have its negative role in the possible development of the People's War. Does that explain this large-scale surrender that we are seeing today? Because it is not just one or two persons surrendering, we are seeing whole groups of people surrendering. So is this one possible reason for that? Of the failure to develop their ideological understanding to a level where they see that this is not the end of it, we have to go further. So in that context, this what I am saying is that it brings to, draws attention to another important question, which again is related to Naxalbari. I'll come to that later, which is that what are the reflections in ideology of the changes taking place in the material reality? For example, in this question of the seizure of political power, earlier you have a situation where you don't have power, you are exploited, you are oppressed by the various exploiters and oppressors, state, local zamindars, tribal chieftains or whatever. Now you have a situation where you have overthrown them and you are exercising power. So what is this material reflection of this new material condition? How is that understood? How is that reflected in your thinking? Obviously, that would have an opposite thing. On the one hand, the necessity of revolution, that would be clear. On the other hand, some sort of a status quo is thinking that we have gained something, we have to protect that, and let us build it now, without understanding it in a broader context. This, again, we can relate to another issue that has been reflected in some of the documents of the CPI Maoist about the impact of the class struggle on production relations, where very fierce anti-feudal struggles took place. The landlords had to back out, land was seized, in some places land was distributed, and all this, a lot of changes have taken place. This has brought about naturally some reconfiguration of the class relations. That is one aspect. But what is the ideological impact of these changes? Because that poses a new question before the revolutionary forces. How do you address this issue ideologically and politically? There is a new ground reality which you have to address on the one hand, but there is also the ideological impact of this ground reality on your own ranks, on your own leadership. So how is that understood? How is that reflected upon? How can we take it up as an issue, a challenge to transform and keep on transforming their ideological thinking in order to handle this new situation and push ahead? As I said, it's related to Naxalbari because, as I earlier mentioned itself, the distinctive feature of Naxalbari was its conscious application of Marxism, Maoism. And it is actually the grasp of Maoism which came through the great debate of the 60s and later the Cultural Revolution that helped the revolutionaries within the CPM to sharpen their revolt to the level of rupture from revisionism and centrism also. One has to keep that in mind because CPM was not an openly revisionist party in the beginning. If you look at the initial, say for example in Kerala, they had started publishing a magazine after splitting away from CPI, which was known as Chinda. In Tamil Nadu, you had the Changathir. And in both the Chinda and Changathir, possibly in other parts of the country also, I am not aware of that, you had articles translated from the Peking Review about the Cultural Revolution. Like the May 16th circular, this, that and all these things used to come in those journals. And the leaders of the CPM used to claim that they are in constant contact with the CPC. Whereas actually they were hobnobbing with the Soviet party, with the Khrushchevites, and they were seeing also with the Indian state and seeing how they could divert the revolutionary fervor of the masses, of the rank and file, into safe parliamentary channels. That was actually what was going on, though outside they were doing all this. So the revolutionaries within the CPM just did not have the task of attacking revisionism, they had the task of identifying centrism as a manifestation of revisionism and attacking that specifically. And which is why CM correctly pointed out that centrism is a stepping stone to revisionism. So it is the ideological sharpening that was possible through grasping Marxism, Maoism, through the great debate and later the Cultural Revolution that enabled these revolutionaries, Comrade Charu Majumdar, Kanhai Chatterjee and all those other comrades, to break with CPM, to say that no, this will not do. And that is why we see the distinction again with those comrades and those like Nagareddy and all that, who are still saying that we should struggle within the CPM and transform them and rectify them and all these things. Ultimately, we know where they ended up. So the ideological sharpness was very decisive in the rupture from CPM revisionism. It was decisive in the concept which guided the Naxalbari armed revolution, and it was decisive in the further developments also. So this ideological standpoint is what I am trying to drive at, that when we see this experience that we are going through now, the setbacks and all these things, what are the ideological underpinnings of that? Why is this happening? There is of course the individual person's cowardice or his, fatigue, his desire to go back into a comfy life. All these things would have played a role, no doubt. But beyond that, there is an ideological aspect to this whole thing. And it is this ideological aspect that we have to grasp, particularly at this period when we are facing a severe setback. And again here, it is not just enough for us to be satisfied with repeating the positions which are necessary and correct, but it is not sufficient. For example, yes, it is true that India still is a semi-feudal, semi-colonial country. But what exactly is the meaning in practice of the anti-feudal struggle today? That is something that has to be concretely addressed by looking at the specific features of how is the semi-feudalism manifested in our society today. Because there are areas where the old type of landlords are not existing today. They have been overthrown or they have themselves withdrawn because of the pressure of the class struggle or for other reasons also. Yet, that does not mean that semi-feudalism has ended. But then what exactly is the semi-feudalism that is existing today? That is something that has to be probed and understood through specific analysis. And it is only when we grasp it properly that these positions that we put forward would have meaning in taking the movement forward again. So these aspects again require us to deepen our understanding of Marxism and Leninism. And there is also another aspect, which is that of a lot of technical things that we have to grasp also. For example, this Operation Kagar that is being mentioned again here. It's interesting to note that the comrades in Philippines are facing almost exactly the same type of situation. You know, that's one people's war which had advanced a very higher level, in fact higher than that in our country at one stage. Now they report that there has been a contraction in their areas that are there under their control and their activities. They identify conservatism among the ranks, among the leadership as one of the important reasons for that. But they also point out into a change of tactics and strategy of the enemy, where aerial bombardment is actually a daily occurrence there. It's not an occasional thing like what we have seen here in India. But they point out how whole areas are being encircled with huge numbers of enemy troops, with campaigns that last. In one example, they speak about a campaign that lasted nearly for 2 years. We know, for example, in the Karagutta issue, from whatever reports that we have later gathered, that the comrades were expecting that this thing would last for at the most a few days. But it lasted for nearly 2 months. And that made it very difficult for them to sustain. So this change of tactics, which obviously has got some sort of a imperialist connection to it, because you see it in Philippines, you see here, it must be guided by the American imperialist or somebody like that. So this is something new that we are facing. There is another aspect, like for example, the question of urbanization. It is not as these people say that there has been urbanization and now the urban issue has become the central. It is no longer the rural issue, which is all nonsense, because there is no such urbanization in our country in the sense of what we understand by urbanization, of the growth of cities and working class population and all that. But there is an influence, an urban influence in the rural areas also. There is no doubt about that. It started through the cable TV and all that, and then now through the spread of the smartphones. So that this consumer culture is there in every nook and corner. And also now this online purchasing has made it even more widespread. So that actually does bring along with it a very degenerative type of culture, no doubt about it. Comprador neocolonial culture is coming in, which mingles along with feudalism. And interestingly, there is a study that has now come out about how AI reinforces and reproduces caste thinking. It's a very sharp exposure of that. Like for example, questions are asked about a name for a person who is eligible for this type of some high class job. Immediately it is that of a Savarna. Then first name is there, and then they ask for the surname. The surname is immediately coming as Pandit or Tiwari or Iyer or something like that. So it's as if only a Brahmin is suited for, or a person of upper caste is suited for that kind of a job. It's AI, a chatbot reporting to you, replying to you. So the way that caste is being reproduced in all this modern technology also is very much evident, and that is going to influence a lot of people also. But that's not the only aspect. Because there is another aspect of the smartphone as a means of communication, of course, but apart from that, that it is bringing the whole world to even the most remotest corners of our country. What is happening in the whole world is also reaching there through Facebook feeds, this thing, that thing, etc., because it is running on an algorithm. So if by chance somebody comes to see a video of some struggle taking place in America and he presses it on it and watches it for some time, then regularly those type of views will be coming into this thing, whether he likes it or not. So the world is actually being taken there to the remotest corners of our country, and that is engaging and enlarging a political sphere. So there is a political sphere which is quite lively and active now as a result of all these modern technological developments, which is very important because that also gives an opportunity for the revolutionaries for carrying out political intervention, not just through the armed struggle or through the mass struggle, but by responding and reacting to political developments through the medium of these social media, which is not something that was there earlier and which definitely we have to consciously apply ourselves to. It would perhaps merit as a new experiment, so to say, in this taking this path of revolution forward. So whatever that might be, to conclude, I'd like again stress this point that what matters is ideology. And sharpening our ideology, deepening our ideological grasp, and applying ideological analytical thinking to the setback that we are facing is what is decisive today, and we should address that by all means possible, while stressing that the path is important, that the path is, we should stand firm on the Naxalbari path. Along with that, we should also do this, otherwise we will not be able to surmount and get across this present situation. So with that I will conclude. Thank you. Let's salute Sir.